Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming out during this busy time of the year, busy time of the season. We're really thrilled to be welcoming this event at the Casa, which we had in Paintola, in the works for a long time, waiting for Summer's film, Summer Within, to be released, which it finally has this year. I was really thrilled about the prospect of hosting it ever since I heard about it from Summer during a conversation here at the Casa more than a year ago, I think, and getting to see the film in advance, which was truly special, and also just getting to know Summer and her involvement in the community, and just real, in addition to intellectual curiosity, real warmth and an ability to connect with so many different kinds of people, and I think a really important presence in the Italian and Italian American community in New York and also at large. To introduce our other participants and also the film, we have Dr. Dominic Longo, who is the founder and managing director of would you call it a business or an institute? Flourishing Gaze. He's also a faculty member in the Women's Studies and Theology departments at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota. He directed the Muslim Christian Dialogue Center, teaches courses on sex and gender and leadership, and he completed a PhD in Arabic and Islamic Studies at Harvard, and a BA in French and German and theology at Boston College. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Dominic Longo.
Thank you very much, Ara. And thanks for all of the honorifics from my CV. But really, I'm just facilitating tonight. And I'm really delighted to highlight the work of three creative intellectuals that we have. Summer Minerva, we will learn a lot about through watching a film here in just a few minutes, and her story as a native of Staten Island and an Italian-American, a queer Italian-American, as I identify as well myself. And her two collaborators, Marzia Mauriello from the University of Naples, an anthropologist, and Danila Cannamela from Colby College, a professor of Italian studies, together co-edited and wrote many parts of this book. So tonight we have a cultural feast, starting with a film and then moving attention to this book. We're going to have a little bit of time after the film for some conversation and questions, and then we'll have some short readings from here by Marzia and Danila, and then again some time for conversation, questions, etc. So lots to come, lots to explore, and I really am delighted that you've all come out for this this evening of Summer Within. So, without further ado, let's then watch the film. And lights, camera, action. I'd like to welcome to the stage Summer Minerva. And I'd like also to welcome to the stage Marzia Mauriello and Danila Cannamela.
Thank you.
We're going to have now a few minutes of reception, really, of the film and conversation with Summer, with Danila, with Marzia, and with all of you. But first, I just want to acknowledge that sort of intimacy of our watching this film, of your story, Summer, and to give you a chance, if you'd like to say something as we watch this in New York City, in this island here. It seems like a special moment. So I just wanted to give you a moment to say anything that you'd like to as we start.
Sure. Well, thank you all first for being here and for sharing this special moment with me and with us. It is definitely a moment, as Ara said, that I have been anticipating for a while. and so excited to finally get to share in this beautiful space at NYU this very long and hard work that, you know, there's so many memories associated with making the film. So each time I watch it, even though I can't even explain to you how many times I've seen the footage aside from living it. But each time I watch, there's always another memory that gets inspired or another image that I seem to have missed before. So, and each audience is different. So, yeah, each time I view is really different and special to me because when the images are the same, the one thing that, you know, as a filmmaker, I attune to is how the room feels different. So I will say that being at Casa Italiana, a place that is, you know, dedicated to the promotion of Italian scholarship and history and culture, it does feel like this film has, you know, earned a place in the conversation about what it means to be Italian American and queer and trans today. So that's actually, you know, what we'll talk about even with the book. But so many thanks, grazie mille, to all of you for being here and to Casa Italiana for hosting.
Thank you, Summer. Let's turn now to your initial responses, observations, questions, to just let us know how the experience of watching the film has been for some of you and what it brought up for you. What questions, what observations would you like to share? Yeah, please.
I would just like to say it was very, very moving. I thought, oh, thank you. I don't have to holler. I thought it was, you know, my grandparents were Neapolitan, and I just thought it tied so much of the mystical part of the culture and the ancient history of that country and culture. And it was very moving to me. And I just think that anyone who has roots in Naples would find this utterly delightful and just fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I just wanted to say I couldn't wait to see this. The mic is running. I'm sorry. I just want to say I could not wait to see this, and it was a million times better than I expected. My father was born here, but he went back to Italy at 3 years old till 14. And he lived in a town, Mugnana del Cardinale, which is right in that area. Oh. And he would always talk about Montevergine. Wow. This was just, and to learn the history, the ancient history was just so exciting because I didn't hear that from him, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, thank
So
you for sharing that.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
You're welcome. Thank you. Yeah, part of the reason why I wanted to make this film, like you kind of shared about, is that, you know, certain stories, certain histories get passed down, and then there are other stories that don't get passed down. And when I was looking at, you know, what does it mean to be queer and Italian American in media representations or in books, I had a really, really hard time finding that, so it turned out. And so, you know, I did what any other rationally minded person would do, is I made a movie about it. So, yeah, this film and this project represents something that I wished that I would have been able to access when I was on the quest to understand my family's history and my ancestry and my lineage as a queer and trans person, which in the film I talk about it a little bit when I'm in the figurine shop, and I'm expressing that, you know, it's amazing to hear about the femminile within the context of this culture. That's, like the man said in the store, it's not something that is like a diversity thing. It's femminile are an important part of the culture. So the fact that they're visible and present is something that I personally didn't have really in any way. So yeah, I'm really relieved that I finished this, and really honored that I had the capacity to start it and to do it.
It strikes me that this is a story of a journey that is at once spiritual and geographic. You're looking for yourself, finding yourself through this kind of history that we as Italian Americans, back in the old country, as my grandparents would call Italy, found it, and you're looking within through this mystical connection that, in a way, you're discovering through the femminile whom you met and were looking for. Yeah. So.
Definitely. I mean, I had to go on this very epic external adventure to arrive at, a really important place inside myself, which is, so many people who have an easier time of feeling a sense of belonging based on their identity. If you express your sexuality in the same way that your family does, or your gender seems to fit into a norm, or, if you have an easier time of being a part of your family, then you may not have the need to go searching for that. And so I went on the external to find something that, I was able to uncover inside of me. It was like a peeling back of the layers, kind of. Yeah.
Yes, Ara.
I have a question for Summer, but our panelists might be able to answer also. Giulia Sbaffi, Dr. Giulia Sbaffi is here, who's also an expert on sexual minorities in Italy. But my question is about a point in the film where one of your interlocutors is talking about how the status of femminili ensured a certain kind of societal sort of not only reverence but kind of protection, right? That it was an almost revered sort of institution in a sense. And then one of your other interlocutors talked about how, in fact, things have gotten better with the recognition of trans people as trans people, which is obviously a very different kind of identity and institutionalization, in a sense, of identity, right? I guess my question is there a sense in Naples in particular that with the visibility of trans people as trans people, that there is a rise in potential violence against them as trans people outside of that kind of revered category of femminili? And this is something that also, I think, in some ways could be asked of certain other kind of Middle Eastern cultures, non-Western cultures, wherein as long as it's not a kind of codified identity that's associated with non-normative heterosexuality, it's an exceptional status, right? That is not subject to sort of the laws of taboo and proscription. But the second that it has a resonance with kind of Western not heterosexuality, it can become subject to violence in a sense, or policing. And I was just wondering if that transition, on the one hand, affords the greater visibility for trans people in Naples, but on the other hand, perhaps leaves them vulnerable in a way that that kind of previous femminile identity, in a sense, almost apotropeically kind of protected, I guess.
Do you have that? I have something, but
You first,
okay.
and then I go.
You'll fill me in. Okay, you'll fill in. Well, whenever people ask me about the experiences of femminili versus trans people in Napoli, it's hard for me to give one clear answer about it because the term itself is used in so many different ways. So there's like the traditional idea of the femminillo, you know, even the word itself like signifies an effeminate male, but then in the Neapolitan dialect, it's femminella. And so, you know, there's this like difference between being from the urban center of Napoli, which represents like one kind of femminillo, and then there's people who are from the provincia who are, you know, more, you know, connected to the earth and connected to the land and the tradition. So there's a lot of difference and diversity in how the word itself is used and how people identify with it. Even within the femminillo world that I know it today, there are, you know, there are splits. There are people who say, I'm femminillo because I haven't undergone a sex change, and those people who did undergo a sex change are not femminelli anymore because they transformed their bodies in order to be, you know, a part of this Western idea of binary gender. And so in terms of, you know, the level of violence, I'm not really sure on the statistics of it, but I will say that within, you know, as my experience of being and interacting in the culture, to be somebody that is perceived as an effeminate male or a trans feminine person, we are highly sexualized and more objectified than I've experienced even in New York City. Walking down the street, especially at night, we are subject to all kinds of sexual invitations, and you know, it's pretty wild actually. The imagination, the cultural imagination that people have about trans feminine people as a spectrum. Which to me is really, you know, reminiscent of Arab cultures and some of the other cultures that you mentioned. But
okay, I agree with Summer. I come from Naples. I'm an anthropologist, and I've been working within the femminile reality for quite a long time. And yes, it's very complex. It's not just one word, there's so many different words within the LGBTQIA plus community in Naples. Femminili were really part of the what we call popular culture, referred to the lower classes of Naples. So they were part of the what we call cultura del vicolo, you know, so the small allays cultures where there was a specific way of living or sharing the public space. So it was a common life, mostly. And femminili were part of this life. We're protected, in a way, from the community, from the vicolo, you know, the small streets they were living in. Of course, there is the part connected to this spiritual dimension and their condition, the liminal condition, which is also widespread all over the world for what I call other gender, people, you know, embodying third genders or other genders, gender variants more in general. So they were considered like sacred figures and connected to, you know, the supernatural world in a way. And this was, that was ensuring a kind of sacredness and protection for them. But this was in the past, and also in the past, we can have different witnesses of, for example, Loredana, who defined herself as femminella trans. So she considered herself in the very middle of femminella's tradition and, you know, her identity as a trans woman, but still belonging to some of the vicolo culture. So it's kind of complicated and complex, but really fascinating for this specific reason. And about violence, we can say it's not easy living in Naples nowadays, as both as femminella and as both as trans people. The difference with the past is that in the past, there was this huge idea of community that is, slightly disappearing nowadays because of the gentrification and touristification of the historical center where Femminile used to live. And because of the sex work connected to, the surgery, the cosmetic surgery, and this change in the appearance of who in the past was considered, femminella, and now is considered trans woman. Some of them, they say that as trans women, they've been marginalized from traditional families in Naples because women are afraid of them now because they look like women and they can be considered dangerous for the families. They don't and furthermore, they don't respect the traditional values of Neapolitan traditional family as the femminelle used to do. It's just very, it's so hard to explain, very complex and extraordinary word in so many, in few words, but I really do think December did a great job, and I'm so moved. It's great for me to have you and watch your documentary. I've been watching it many times, and it's different. Even for me, it's different anytime that I watch them. And thank you very much. As a Neapolitan, thank you very much.
Yes. Well, I just want to add one quick thing, Marzia, to what you alluded to, and then I think this is also related to what Ara was asking. You were talking about how, in the past, the figure of the Femminile was related to something spiritual and related to something almost supernatural is the word that you used. And it was really that link, that connection between gender and spirituality that made me want to really understand this phenomenon in a lot of different cultures. Because as we know, trans people haven't only been considered sacred in Napoli. It's something that we see in Two-Spirit cultures in native North and South America. We see it in the Polynesian islands. We see it in Mexico and India. So this was something that I found inside of myself and then did the research after to kind of prove it.
This seems like a great moment to put more focus now on the book project. There's, of course, more about the film, and we can keep talking about the film, and indeed the book does. Do you mind holding up the book, Danila, just to... Unfortunately, we don't have copies for everyone. We do have a couple of info sheets, and I'll ask you to pass around, maybe take a photo of the I'm afraid we don't have pages for everyone. But the first place to start is this book is in a way a part of the queer collaboration of you three creative intellectuals who have your own story, each of you, and you've each been on a journey, and you are on a journey together. This is the first time you are in person all together in one place. So it's a special moment for them as a team and to share that with you here in New York. Perhaps to start, could you give us a little bit of an overview of what is this book and what kind of contribution are you meaning to make with this book?
Okay, thank you so much. So the idea for the book came from this overarching question. So what happens if we remap Italian literature and culture from the perspective of Italian and Italian-American people who self-identify as trans? And basically, the book came as an answer to this big question. So we collected stories and translated stories. We interviewed people. We translated essays and more theoretical perspectives that provide us with this possibility to have a journey through Italy, a journey that is a little counterintuitive because we start from the south of Italy and then we follow diasporic and migratory routes, as I said, through the lens of Italian American trans people, but also migrant people who happen to live in Italy and their trends. Would you like to add something else?
Beautiful. That's a great start. We're going to have a couple of pieces read by Danila and Marzia from the book to give a taste of it, and then we'll talk more about the book from there. So.
I start. Okay. I'm going to give it to you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I will start from an excerpt that is from a book by Porpora Marcasciano. The title is Tra le rose e le viole. And in this passage that I will read, Porpora collected the story of a friend. His name is Antonello, but in other stories, she is actually called La Merdaiola. And it was also very complicated to translate the name Merdaiola because I really didn't know what it means. So to make a very long story short, I had to call Porpora, and she told me that basically it means furba, which in English would be furba, like somebody who's, yes, sly, yes. We thought that it was something of somebody's getting into trouble, you know, but no, it's actually somebody who's really furba. In this passage, Merdaiola, that here she is mentioned as Antonello, describes the life of a Femminiello in Naples. And so I will read just a little bit. One of our favorite pastimes after lunch and also at night after work is to play tombola, or a tumbulella, as we call it. It's more than a game, it's true entertainment, and some among us are quite the experts. The game of tombola has its own rules and traditions, you see. In Naples, only women and Femminielli can play because the pants, men, bring bad luck. What's more, each number has its own meaning, and based on those we bicker back and forth as the numbers are pulled out of the basket. Starting with the tombola numbers, then adding words and phrases, we Femminielle have built a language that only we can understand. For example, 44 means prison, 72 is astonishment, 38 is a beating. Then we add more words and phrases. We all know this dialect. When you learn it, you become a true Femminiella. In the beginning, we used this language as a way not to be understood by others, especially the police, and to feel more united. Today, though, many of these terms have entered into common usage. It was also a secret language we used so as not to be understood by the boys. In the Naples of the past years ago, it wasn't like it is now with trans women, transvestites, gay people and Femminielli all hanging out together, all emancipated. Back in the day, a Femminiello was a man who felt like a woman and fell in love with a man, with the kind of man who only had relations with women. So Femminielli only hang out with each other and among themselves. They spoke only this language so they could communicate better and the boys wouldn't understand. A Neapolitan Femminiello feels like a woman in the most traditional sense of the word, not a modern and independent woman who has a job and lives on her own, who doesn't have children but only a few lovers. No, absolutely no. A Femminiello feels like a wife, a mother, a sister, a hard worker, a great cook, a good housewife, loyal, religious. Everything he has never been able to do, everything he strives to do better and more, whatever the cost.
This is perfect.
We're going to do 4 little pieces. So that was the first. And Marzia is going to read a second, and then we'll have one more little round of a little taste of this feast.
Yeah, this is a chapter about Romina Cecconi. Romina Cecconi is kind of an icon for the Italian trans community. Is one of the first Italian transsexual women who went through gender reassignment surgery, what is called gender confirmation nowadays. She's a pioneer of LGBTQ plus activism and fights for civil rights in Italy, and she's still regarded as an icon of the trans movement. And in 1976, Cecconi published her autobiography, Io la romanina perché sono diventata donna. So after the surgery, she went back to Italy, and she was forced to confinement because of the Italian law against what back then was considered a gender disguise and a crime, so was punished with confinement. So I'm going to read part of this chapter. And when she actually arrived in Volturino, this very tiny, small town in the south of Italy, as a woman, when on her document she was still a man. So it was a very great confusion. Okay. I arrived in Foggia. A while after it had gotten dark, I presented myself to the Carabinieri, my police force, as I had been ordered. Say simply, I am Cecconi, surname. According to the written telephone message, they were waiting for Cecconi Romano, first name. Raising his eyes from a pile of paperwork, the guard said, "Ah, the wife, and your husband, where is he?" "I'm the husband. The Cecconi you're waiting for is me," I responded, unperturbed. The poor conscripted officer, he made a face of every color and assembled the colleagues and superiors he could find. "You cannot go around dressed like that," I was told. And I need to say that sex reassignment surgery, cambio di sesso, in Italy was allowed with a law in 1982. So here we are before then, in the 70s. So that's why nobody could understand. I am a woman from the tips of my toes to the top of my head. Show us then. I had to undress. Then they called the boss. Even he did not want to accept what the operation has rendered evident, even to a child. But how can it be? But how can it be? He agonized as he scratched the back of his neck with a pen. Our colleagues in Florence have played a good joke on us. In the end, he asked me to take off my clothes, and for the second time, I slipped out of my dress. I hinted at 2 steps of a striptease. Before becoming completely nude, I let out a little shout, "Opla!" as I had done at Madame Arthur's when I would finish my strip. If I had to undress myself, I preferred to do the catwalk rather than feel myself humiliated and pathologically observed. Naked, I began to show off my feminine attributes, calling on the corporals and surgeons to bear witness. "She is really a piece of ass," was their follow comment, full of good taste, distraction, manners.
Okay, so this other part is very different and is more theoretical, and is about a meeting that trans activists and scholars had in 2008, and after the meeting, a group of them published this book titled Elementi di critica trans, which echoes Mario Mieli's book, and in a way is one of the few kind of grassroots theoretical books written in Italian about what it means to be trans. And the book was inspired, as I said, by a meeting. There were different days in which activists and scholars discussed together. In the first day, they talked about what is trans Italian history. And so I would read a little excerpt. So, what is our history? If a history usually begins with the fateful first time that establishes a beginning, what was the first time of the trans experience? To what can we link it? To the first gender reassignment surgery? From this point of view, the first Italian case was that of Romina Cecconi in 1966. She had her surgery in Geneva, but she's considered an Italian case. But in 1952, in Denmark, Christine Jorgensen had already had her surgery. By contrast, if the first time is linked to the discovery and development of hormonal therapies and the innovations of aesthetic surgery, this happens more or less at the beginning of the 70s. But prior to these innovations, where and how was our experience manifesting itself? Or if transsexuality originates with the coinage of its name and therefore more or less in 1952, but in Italy in the 70s, before that, who were we? Or finally, does our history begin with the struggle of trans people for their recognition? If we think about it, there could be many different first times. It depends on which one we acknowledge as our beginning.
And then I am going to read a part of a chapter where we made 3 interviews to 2 trans men who are activists in Italy, or have been in one case, okay? And I'm just going to read a very small part from one of them, whose name is Christian Ballarin. To be honest, I don't know how much I succeeded in engaging in activism on an international level. I don't remember what year it was, maybe 2005. At the time, we were still the Luna group. Anyway, I remember that we went to Vienna to the conference that led to the creation of TGEU, and we were one of the founding members of this important European association for trans people. This broader engagement, despite being difficult at times, has been very enriching. I got to meet influential activists who had very different yet very significant approaches. A nice thing that I remember with a smile is that in 2012, I think, we went to the Pride in San Francisco. We expected to go to a Pride as we did in Italy and participate in the demonstration, and so we brought our Maurice, the association is president, flag and wanted to parade. But our American friend told us, look, participating costs money. I don't know, maybe $200 or $300 per party. This meant that your group could have had 4 people or you could have had 100. It made no difference. You had to pay for one slot because it was your slot. So we said, wait, but we've never paid to participate in a Pride. We are not a business. We soon discovered that a trans march was going to take place the day before the Pride, partly because the trans activists were a bit pissed off about the secondary role that the trans issue had within the Pride, and partly because they shared our perspective and thought that the Pride has turned into a highly commercial thing that was all tied up in sponsorships. They thus wanted to host what I'll call a people's event, open to everybody. We went to this trans march where there were really weird characters, but also a really nice atmosphere. It was similar to how we imagined a demonstration to be. At the end, we arrived at the park when there was live music and stages for speeches, those kind of things, basically. The next day, we went to the actual Pride, the official one, and we were behind barriers. What we'd have in Italy for a march of the Alpini, so the Italian Army Specialist Mountain Infantry. This is how it worked. You watched the parade go by, they were throwing gadgets at you, and then Google was marching too, and airline companies. All this was inconceivable to us. And there were police patrolling the parade on the side of the street, I remember that two girls who were a little drunk and also a little silly wanted to join the parade. They tried to climb over the barriers, and the policeman took them and threw them out. They literally flew over us. My boyfriend, who is very barricadero, let's say that he has a strong revolutionary spirit, was getting pissed at the cops, and our American friend said, "No, you better not say anything." Overall, this San Francisco experience was quite peculiar, and the prior we experienced was very far from our idea of what a demonstration for civil rights should be, while the trans march we participated in was exactly what we'd had in mind.
Thank you for reading us little excerpts as tastes of this marvelous book. I have been reading a few of the essays that you've written and some of the historical pieces as well, and I can attest it's well worth your time. Has everyone seen the flyer that needed to see it, or have you taken a photo? Has it moved its way around? Okay. I know that when you were telling me what the significance of this book, and a little bit here, you said there's something, the first. This book is the first, what? Can you just remind us of the sort of original significance of this book in the kind of scholarly literature and in the literature out there so far?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that because also with the film, there was, as I was looking for research about the Femminili, I realized that the only research that I could find was in Italian. And so, similarly with, with the resources provided in this book and the essays and a lot of the interviews that have been done, some of them are original and have been written for the book, but many of them are translated. So to my knowledge, this is the first real piece of scholarly work written in English about the Femminili, and a lot of the other activists and artists represented in the book, their work hadn't yet been translated. So that's definitely a first.
What else from a scholarly point of view?
But definitely what Summer said, that we put together a corpus of literature that it could have been found, but not in English, and it would have taken a lot of time for people to get an idea of what Italian trans literature and culture could be. And what we tried to do, hopefully we accomplished it, was to create a corpus, to put everything together and to imagine a possible journey through Italy and, as I said, migratory route, diasporic route, so that people could have the same experience that many of the authors collected here had.
Beautiful. Anything? Okay. So I'm curious about it being in English and what its significance is, that this is a book by SUNY Press, published in, you translated these historical sources from Italian. And indeed, in some ways, it's this collaboration with an Italian American that you two, as Italian scholars, created this book. Can you just tell us a bit more about the sort of diasporic aspect, about the collaboration between Italians and an Italian American that made this book in English to be what it is?
I can say something, sure. Oh, sure. So as Danila said earlier, the book is divided into geographical areas. So there's south, there's north, there's central, and then there is the diasporic roots. And so the Italian American section that also has the work of an Italian Canadian was my part. And I think part of my own independent research as an artist and a researcher has been to try to understand what it means to be trans and Italian American and queer. And so part of the journey for me has been about collecting writings and perspectives of other people that share the same identity. It's still in formation. I don't really have a clear answer about it yet. It's something that each time I connect with another queer or trans Italian American, we find interesting parallels in our experiences and our little microculture and our affinities. So I think the Italian American portion of the book is kind of a little bit of a snapshot of, you know, what it's kind of up to the reader to decide, like, well, how are these essays and how are these poems kind of linked together? And what does that say about these, you know, mixing of identities that for many people seem kind of disparate? Yeah.
I mean, definitely one of the challenges in translating was the pronouns, but not in the way we think of it in English, because usually the problem is when you are expressing your identity in Italian. But the same problem can happen when you are translating, because here we also have a lot of trans people who go back and forth from lui and lei, which I think is something beautiful, and you cannot do that in the same way in Italian with all those endings of the word. It's something that gets lost. Or like you have trans people who, for some reasons, for example, Antonello always speaks in the masculine. But that masculine is not the same, you know, of some other people who use the lui form. And so there is this beauty of the Italian language that in a way gets lost. And usually we have this dominant narrative that being a gender language, Italian poses so many issues to people who are gender variant, gender non-conforming, or trans. Whereas I think that there are many nuances of the Italian language that actually enrich these identities, that push us to really see these identities in a way that we don't do with with English. We just use the they many times, and in a way that they makes people invisible, neutral. With the Italian, you have to see these identities, and so there is something that gets lost in the translation, and I wanted to mention because it's still something I'm thinking about, and it's probably something that you won't see when you read it, because it kind of got lost in the translation process.
Yeah, I wanted to add about the femminile and about language. Some of them, they ask us just to not to talk in the feminine and the masculine version when we talked about them, but sometimes in the feminine version, sometimes in the masculine version, and the term femminello can be used in different ways, like feminella in the feminine version, when feminelle are among themselves. They talk in feminine version, they call each other feminelle, while they don't expect from people from outside of community to call them feminella, but on the masculine version of the term, femminello. Yeah, also told to them in the masculine form. So this is really fascinating. Yeah, as Danila was saying, it's enriching. Absolutely, yes.
May I open again to you? Yes, please. Oh, you have. Yeah, there's.
Well, thank you for being here, and can you hear me? Yes. And thank you for your work. I think this book is really important because it's coming at a time where the interest in trans studies in Italy is expanding, with the translation of Porpora being done by Rutgers, and then Samuel Zawadzki, who's a graduate student from Johns Hopkins, is now working on the translation of Romina Cecconi biography. So it's clearly time that it's expanding, and then we have Summer Your movie, and then Elena Torre just made the movie about Le Favolose. So clearly we are looking more into the trans community, and yet your book is the only one who's setting the South at the center. And so my question is why? And I'm asking is this from the perspective of someone who has been working on sex work and the politicization of sex work in Italy from the 80s till to the beginning of the migration crisis. And I started with Catania, and I start my journey and my research with Catania. So I see the value, the historiographical and genealogical value setting the South at the center. But I wonder why you started with the South. It's because of the migration, it's because of the gender politics, it's because of all of this. Thank you.
Okay, I start to answer and then please jump in. We started with the South because of the Femminelli, of course, and because we thought that there was this story of religious syncretism and this history that you wouldn't find in the North. So there was something about the South that was more conducive to this identity, as if the identity belonged there. There was also something about the South and this Mediterranean masculinity, the fact also that people like men could have relationships with trans women and they would still perceive themselves as, heterosexual men, which for us was very puzzling and is also shared in the Mediterranean area. And also, as you suggested, there are stories of migration. So, for example, there is an interview with Mazen Massoud, and he came from Libya, and he shared with us this very fascinating story of being a person from Africa, moved to the US, to Italy, but with many different cultures, and also this interesting mixing of a culture that could be considered matriarchal and this centrality of the Virgin Mary, for example, but also very patriarchal. And now, for example, the Femminelli have adjusted to a context that is still very patriarchal. They don't challenge the context, but they, in a way, have sabotaged the rules of the setting. So there is a lot about the South that I think makes that part of Italy the center of our inquiry.
Something that was really interesting that I found in my research, especially when I was speaking with Ciretta Cascina, and she talks about how the figure, the personaggio of the Femminello is of its own, it's its own thing. I asked her before if she saw a link between the Femminelli and the Mushe of Oaxaca or the Two Spirits of North America, and she said, the reason why we're Femminelli is because we were planted in this soil. And she said that her Femminello identity was so rooted in the geography of Naples and Campania, more so even than a concept of gender. She has her own very specific ideas about what it means to even be a part of the LGBTQ community, which she sees as something that's very Western and modern. For her, she is the earth of Naples. She is the volcano and the sea. And being born of that doppio, that duality is how she actually identifies. So, asking her to make links between herself and other traditions from other places, which from maybe an academic point is almost a no-brainer. It's like, yes, you're in between genders, and therefore you're like other cultures that are in between genders. But in reality, there is almost like an ecological expression of gender that I think is really special.
I was thinking of this. In a way, if you look at Italy from the perspective of the South and trans identities, you can see kind of a narrative that can join the global South. And there is another thing that I want to share with you because it's maybe an obsession that I have. But there is a way to be inclusive in Italian and to use the final U, which, for example, in Sicilian dialect is the masculine. So from a feminist perspective, you see just the return of the masculine, the neutral masculine, in LGBT kind of discourses. Because when I hear U, and I think as a person who was born and raised in Sicily, I hear O. And so for me, it's just speaking again in the masculine. So I think that even when we try to be inclusive, we are not thinking from the perspective of the South. We are just thinking from the dominant perspective of the North, which is a little problematic. Okay.
Dexter.
Hi. Thank you so much for all your work. This has been really fun tonight. My question is a history question, because I've done my own independent research on Femminelli a little bit, but like you said, there's not a lot of resources in English, so yay, thank you. But there's a big gap between someone who is a babysitter, which is what people are like, oh, they used to be babysitters, to a sex worker. And so I wonder if there's a historical element to that, because obviously the church has been dominant in Italy for a very long time. So it doesn't make sense that it's like, well, it used to be pagan and accepted and then it wasn't. So I don't know if there's like a 20th century just political upheaval that caused this, or if there's something like that.
That's a very interesting question. Very hard to answer because, yeah, it is cold. There was a kind of passage also in language between femminelle and trans people in Italian. In Naples, if we talk about femminelle, we talk about Naples and a specific cultural and social segment of Naples, not all the city, but a specific part of it. This is really important because of the popular culture I was talking of earlier. But there were a period of time in the 70s where, some of the femminelle, but not everybody of the community, started to change the body with cosmetic surgery when sex works emerged in the community. But they were not called femminelle anymore. They were not trans. They were transvestites. But not in the sense that in English is attributed to the word. They were called travestiti in the masculine form, which is different from transvestites, which is another. The translation is as transvestites, but there's another meaning. It was just describing this feminelle/trans, we're not trans yet, who started working down the street like sex workers. So, but this is a part of the community of Feminelle because some other people decided not to change the body, not to go working as sex workers, but stay in the community and being babysitting and all the things that we heard also in summer documentary. That there is a kind of a gap for what concerns the historical path of the Feminelles community because it's very differentiated within. That's why. It's not a passage from Feminelle to transgender women. It's not. There's something in the middle and something more than this. I hope I answer your question.
Other questions? Yes, please.
Thank you all for this beautiful panel discussion, and thank you, Summer, for this beautiful film and sharing this experience with us. I was really moved. I mean, the first thing which I wanted to say is, it's kind of obvious, I think, to everybody, but I think a very beautiful aspect of the film, which we haven't covered too much in the discussion, is your relationship to your grandmother. I think you did a fantastic job at going through that, and I can sort of imagine how sort of painful in a way. It must be to sort of rethink and sort of go through that. And the question which I have for all of you is kind of different, but rethinking about it while I was, sort of formulating it in my mind, I think it's kind of connected to the question of your relationship to your grandmother in a way, because it has to do with time. Because it seems to me that, the discussion of trans geographies is so captivating and so compelling, but also because this geography is kind of challenging also assumptions about time, right, and the linearity of time. And I think there's a very beautiful moment in the film when, in the sort of Cibele kind of rethinking of the origins of the Femminelli, the protagonist of that scene says, when explaining that, this story begins in a time which is so old that it's kind of almost now, right? I mean, this idea of going back in time while also reactivating it in the present. And this going back and forth between past and present is really part of your description of your relationship to your grandmother. And then it seems to me that the discussion of, as I said, geographies does bring up the question of time. So I look forward to reading the book, but the kind of curiosity I have is really whether this question comes up, or how did you tackle the question of dealing not only trans-geographically about these topics, but also sort of in a kind of a trans-temporal, trans inevitably brings with it time, right? But it's really one of my sort of own obsessions. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on these various things. Thanks.
Why are you looking at me?
Tell us, time traveler.
Everyone's like, right. Well, time was a big theme that we worked with in the film. And so you got that. And we referenced time with the different visual mediums. So we actually did use Super 8 film, and we also used digital, and we also used family archival from the 90s, from the 80s, from the 70s, from the 60s. So I think the medium of film really lends itself to a reorganization of time, because in watching just this film, you were looking at images from, actually moving images from that spanned over 50 or 60 years, plus all of the images of the paintings and the other things from, way, way, way back when. To me, my perspective on time, I'm going to get a little, I don't know what to call it, but to me, like doing this deep work and reconnecting with my ancestors, like I've done a lot of work in what I would call ancestral healing. And so my process of ancestral healing has to do with being in dialogue and in communication with ancestors of my lineage and ancestors of my immediate land that I live on. It doesn't necessarily have to be an ancestor that I know, but I have certain spiritual practices that connect me with ancestors who have passed maybe 100 years ago. And in that spiritual work, I have been able to, at least according to my belief, is that I've been able to actually heal family lineages through, like, I've been able to heal relationships that you even witness in the film, like with my parents, by connecting with ancestors who were here, over 100 years ago. And so in working in the now with energies that I can interface with from the past, I can really reconnect and make whole certain relationships that live now. And so I do believe that we have this understanding of time as this linear thing. One thing happens after the next, and I think that is about perception. I think that's about the way that our minds perceive things. But anybody knows if you're exercising, for example, and you're doing push-ups, like how slowly time seems to go. Or when you're watching your favorite movie, how fast it goes. And I think those are just kind of small examples of the way that time can shift. But that's definitely something that I do feel like I have a trans perspective on the linear aspect of time, because I even invented a deity, actually, a deity. Her name is Neverush, and it's like, I'm just gonna share the secret that if you're ever feeling like you're late for something, you can say the name of this deity 3 times, and suddenly you get there on time. So, her name is Neverush, Neverush, Neverush. I invented her, but she seems to get me where I'm going. Yeah.
Maybe what I can add to Never Rush is that in a way the book creates many intergenerational spaces, because in the same volume there are authors in their 20s, authors in their 90s, but also there are very different ways to approach identities that are also based on age, that want to challenge the idea that there is, in a way, a normative way to be non-normative. And so I think time can also work in this way within this journey through geography.
I just wanted to add that being a Femminello also means being queer. So it's the members of a very ancient community, because the first witnesses of their presence in Naples dated back in 16th century. So they're kind of old, ancient community, but they're also very postmodern because of their queerness, but it wasn't the word to describe them. And the fact that Summer is feeling a Feminella is the very answer to all our questions about it.
So one question I would like to bring to you, I sort of, we warned you, so to speak, ahead of time, that I'd like to bring your own identities, the two of you especially, into the conversation. We go so intimately, Summer, into your quest, your story, your transitions. And part of what you are looking into is also a shared inquiry about what is the Femminello? Who are the Femminelli for straight folks? What is the place of trans folks, of queer folks, of gender non-conforming and non-variant folks? What is... And so here, I notice this collaboration is in a way quite queer in how straight it is. We have 2 straight women and collaborating with you, one an Italian working in Italy, one an Italian working in America, and your queer magnificence as an Italian American from here in Staten Island. So this question is for you, Marzia, and you, Danila, of your own transitions, in a sense, your own quest, and what has this journey of making this book with Summer, with each other, what has it meant to you in your own becoming yourselves?
Thanks for this very, very important and nice question. It was a journey, it's still a journey. Personally, I've started all my work about gender variance and trans experience because I was questioning myself about my gender in the sense that I don't really fit into the category of feminine in the sense that I have no idea what femininity is. So this is, and you know, working at the subject is enriching me every day, and working with Danila, with Summer, our differences, our different lives, our different experiences enriched me so much in this journey. That is a never-ending journey, actually, but this is a very nice path for me personally.
So for me, the journey was more from the perspective of geography, because being an Italian who lives in the US, actually, I always like to quote Silvia Rivera. She used to say that she was a queen in exile. I'm in exile in Maine. And coming from Maine to New York, it's really an experience. However, that's just a joke. So, as an Italian living in Maine, I'm always perceived as the Italian. And then when the one. But when I'm in Italy, I'm like the person who lives in the US. And so I of course, I don't have the experience of being trans, but I really have this experience of being many things and being perceived in many ways, at times even as someone who is not from here, like in Maine, but who knows from where. And so I started to think about what it means to be crossing boundaries constantly. So my way to appreciate and understand the trans experience comes from my very peculiar geography. And that's how I relate to what it may mean to be transgender from a gender perspective.
Thank you. Summer, any thing from your side about your collaboration with these two wonderful women on this project as we bring this conversation to completion?
Yeah, I would say that I also, as much as I've made work about identity and gender, I really find it really hard to kind of conceptualize mentally what it means to feel feminine or to feel masculine. For me, it's a purely embodied experience, but yeah, working with you two was fabulous. I mean, it was such an honor to work with you, Marzia, on this. Such a real pioneer and person that has done really significant, important research for the whole planet. And to get to partner with you on this was, it was truly a dream. And Danila, the vision for this book, you honoring me to be included on the, from the very beginning on it. And I try to view the world through a gendered lens because I have access to it. But in relating with people close to me, like the two of you, I don't feel gender. It doesn't seem to exist in intimacy, and in friendship. Unless you're kind of playing, if you're playing with gender, then that's like, that's a different thing. But that's not what I'm talking about. So, it was really an honor, and this book was a labor of love of 4 years of just working together on it, and the collection of writings is spans many years. So,
well, thank you again for bringing the fruit of your play and your labor to us tonight. It's really been a lovely feast. Thank you for being in this conversation, and we invite you to buy the book, be in further conversation with these three creative intellectuals and scholars. Thank you all for being here tonight.